ערב טוב. אנחנו פותחים היום כינוס בינלאומי על שואה ורצח עם, ולכבוד אורחנו אני אעבור לאנגלית. Distinguished guests, distinguished scholars, members of the diplomatic corps, we are opening today an international symposium on Holocaust and genocide. It is a rather somber field of study, of course, but since it deals not only with analysis of past events, but also with genocide prevention in the future, it may be a field in which social sciences and humanities can benefit humanity in a more obvious, concrete, and direct way than in other fields. In the various sessions of this symposium, pertinent topics in this general field will be debated, such as the possibility of prevention, such as the possibility to predict mass atrocities and genocidal situations, and also relevant issues of international laws and ways of prevention. So I would like to welcome you all to the Israel Academy and wish you a very successful workshop. The symposium has been convened by the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities with the participation of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Israel, the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, the Institute of Contemporary Jewry at the Faculty of Humanities of the Hebrew University, and the Truman Institute of the Hebrew University. We are grateful to these institutions, and a representative of each of them will now have a floor for a few minutes. However, Dr. Hexel of the Ebert Stiftung has been unable to come, and he has asked me to read his greeting in his stead. So I am doing this. The Friedrich Ebert Stiftung is a political, social democratic foundation which opened its offices in Tel Aviv in 1978. From the very beginning, dealing with the Shoah has been a focal point of our work in Israel. As a German organization, this is our duty, especially in Israel. We attach much importance to the cooperation with institutions that approach the subject from different angles and perspectives. For instance, we dealt extensively with the influence of Holocaust survivors on Israeli society. The Hebrew publication, which came out of 3 conferences, will be soon published in German translation. The Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Israel supports Israeli-German and Israeli-European dialogue and exchange on the Shoah in different contexts, always looking to broaden the historical scope to a present one. Therefore, it was an honor when Professor Yehuda Bauer approached me with the idea that the Friedrich Ebert Foundation becomes a partner in the Symposium on Holocaust and Genocide. As Professor Bauer wrote, the Jewish specificity and the universal implications of the Holocaust are 2 sides of the same coin. It is clear that the purpose of this event is to learn from the past because the danger of genocide is present in so many places. We have closely followed the progress in work and would like to thank all involved. First and foremost, Professor Yehuda Bauer. Your writings on the subject are a source of inspiration in Israel and worldwide because your academic analysis and knowledge is always connected to your humanistic values and deep concern for human life and dignity. In my mind, this is what the present symposium is all about. I would also like to thank Professor Arnon, Rabbi Professor Naftalí Routenberg, Ambassador Moshe Arad, and Professor Reuven Amitai. This event is based on the expertise of the eminent Israeli, German, and American scholars who have agreed to participate. It is a great pleasure and honor that you are here. Let me also thank Gali Hafinzi and Rasegal, who have been our direct partners for the work on the ground, for the excellent cooperation. I apologize that I cannot attend personally today due to health reasons, but I will be glad to hear about the contents and conclusions of this international symposium. I wish you fruitful discussions and hope that this event might have the impact it deserves beyond the academic world, and that political decision makers will learn from it. As a political foundation, we will be glad to assist. So this was the greeting of Dr. Ralph Hexel. Our second speaker in this session will be Rabbi Professor Neftalí Routenberg, please.
Erev Tov, good evening. On behalf of the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, I'd like to congratulate the originators of the Symposium on Holocaust and Genocide. A discourse on Holocaust and Genocide produced contradictory reactions among Jews and Israelis. Holocaust contempt on the one hand, and extreme sensitiveness, don't touch my Shoah, al tigu li b'Shoah. Don't compare and don't analyze on the other hand. I'd like to thank all contributors and to wish you a fruitful symposium. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Erev Tov, good evening. Madam Ambassadors, Professor Arnón, dear colleagues, friends, and guests from Israel and abroad. In the name of the Faculty of Humanities at the Hebrew University, I am honored to welcome you all here to the opening of the International Symposium on Holocaust and Genocide. Much to our chagrin, the study of mass murder of ethnic groups or other types of communities is not only the focus of the work of historians, but also concerns social scientists, journalists, those working in government service and the third sector, and in fact, any citizen anywhere with eyes in his head and something between the ears. Indeed, organized mass murder by states or other elements is still part of the world we live in, and one does not have to look too far in this region to find at least one current example. Deliberate mass murder has been part of the human condition since time immemorial. Even a cursory sweep of history shows that it was one of the side effects of war and at times an integral part of it. Resistant populations were punished, and the resistance of the enemy further down the line was broken. Long before the Crusaders and the Mongols, which are two subjects which I myself deal with, systematic cruelty and murder were part of the political and military toolbox. Yet it seems to me that in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution and the development of modern ideologies, these matters have taken a definite turn for the worse. Killing could be done on a much more efficient and one might even say industrial scale, and sophisticated ideology, secular and otherwise, might be called to justify the killing or to motivate the killers. Yet it appears that here and there was now a separation between warfare per se and genocide or Holocaust. War had become more industrialized. The killing of many civilians might have been more efficient, but these matters did not necessarily come together. But yet again, things seem to have changed, this time with the war against the Jews waged by the Nazis, though a case could be made that perhaps we are already seeing something similar in the mass killings of the Armenians by the Turks in World War I. For the latter case, further study is required. However, there is no doubt that the mass systematic killing of Europe's Jewry, initiated by the Nazis, was an integral part of their war effort, and where we had the worst of all possible worlds. Industrial methods of murder, combined with the need of the German leadership to eradicate all Jews as a necessary component of their desire to rule all of Europe and perhaps beyond. I have no doubt that the study of the Jewish Holocaust can gain much profit from putting it in the context of the history of certain types of mass killing, what we refer to as genocide. At the same time, the study of the history of genocide can be much enriched by the study of the Holocaust. I salute the organizers and the patrons of this symposium and wish the participants innovative and stimulating discussion. Thank you and good evening.
last speaker in this session is Ambassador Moshe Arad, the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Truman Institute at the Hebrew University.
Thank
Please.
you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure, it's a genuine pleasure to represent the Truman Institute for Advancement of Peace of the Hebrew University tonight for the opening of this symposium on the Holocaust and Genocide. You know what they say about professional diplomats. They know a little bit about many subjects, none of the subjects in the depth needed or as required by academics. So I will not be tempted to address the subject, but I was attempted this morning, or actually yesterday, last evening, to look at the Harper Dictionary of Modern Thought, what they say about the Holocaust. And strangely enough, and this is a revised edition from 1988. Alan Bullock, the British historian, was one of the editors of this dictionary. And when you look up the word Holocaust, you are directed actually to the term final solution. And out of about 900 pages of this dictionary, what do they have to say about final solution? I will read it to you because it's very brief and very short. A Nazi German euphemism for the physical extermination of European Jewry, the final solution to the Jewish problem, full stop. Implementation of such a policy was first discussed at a conference of Nazi German ministerial representatives at Wannsee in January 1942, a fact well known to all of us present. The means were extermination camps using mass gas chambers and mass assassination squads. In all, between 4.5 and 6 million victims perished in what Jewish historians term the Holocaust. At the Nuremberg trial, various survivors of the Nazi regime were convicted of genocide. Less than 80 words. So I think it's very timely to discuss the issue, which is a major subject of this encounter, of this academic symposium. And as someone who has also a personal experience of the Holocaust, not in gas chambers, of course not, and not in extermination camps, but only as a 7 to 10-year-old kid between 41 and 44, had to wear the Yellow Star of David in northern Romania, without knowing whether in the morning we will wake up in the same room or in the same home with my parents. I would like to say that I represent now here, without asking him, the future academic director of the Truman Institute, Professor Menachem Blondheim, who will start his position as academic director of the Truman Institute in October. And I wish you all a very successful debate. And I'm sure with the presence here of such historians and people which were my teachers like Professor באואר, I don't see now here, I saw it earlier on, Professor Arnon, the president of the Academy. I'm sure she followed these events very closely. I wish you lots of success. Thank you very much.
We are now moving to the central part of this session, which will include a keynote lecture and 2 responses. And it is my honor and privilege to call upon Professor Yehuda Bauer, who is member of the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities, recipient of the Israel Prize, the real dean of Holocaust studies in this country, the spiritus rector of this conference, and most recently also commander of the Polar Star, a title awarded by the King of Sweden. And I am calling upon you now to deliver the keynote address. Please.
Mr. Chairman, colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the introduction. This is an unusual symposium, and there are several reasons for its structure. One is that a traditional conference on such a topic would most probably only yield papers that one can read elsewhere in any case, followed by a discussion that would take, at most, about 20 minutes after each paper. This is not what we are looking for. The second is the topicality of the subject, which arouses emotions that often get the better of the participants, but such outbursts do not lead anywhere. What we need, we thought, was the possibility of a fruitful dialogue, one that would be based on theoretical concepts on the one hand, and provide some practical ideas of how to possibly diminish the incidence of mass violence and genocidal dangers on the other hand. In the words of Professor Barbara Harf, who is here with us tonight, quote, theory-driven practicality, unquote. Dangers of mass violence, up to and including genocide and genocidal dangers, are real issues, and the real possibilities of addressing them in the real world are of tremendous importance. However, without a theoretical framework based on multidisciplinary research, it is very difficult to deal with them. Hence the structure of this meeting, which includes public events at the opening and closing of the symposium and closed sessions where invited participants can speak freely. Hopefully, the symposium will produce ideas for continued research and establish networks of scholars who will continue the discussion in the future. We have included people with different and often conflicting views, and we hope this will lead to lively exchanges. No unanimity or public statement are expected or aimed at. However, we have invited diplomats accredited to the State of Israel, some of whose governments have utilized whatever insights some of our participants may have provided in the past, and we will be happy if they draw their own conclusions as to how best to address the challenges we will be discussing here. I'm sure academics will be more than willing to advise governments on these matters to the best of their abilities if they are asked to do so. We will be dealing with 4 topics out of a large number we could have chosen. The first actually has already been discussed. It deals with the issue of the relationship between the genocide of the Jews in World War II, inaccurately known as the Holocaust, and other genocides. The second will address the issue of quantitative research into genocide and genocidal events, because quantitative research based on accessible data assessing global risks of outbreaks of mass violence is essential in supplying the kind of information and background political actors of goodwill may need to shape practical policies. The third topic will deal with the situation in the Great Lakes region, Somalia and Sudan, where mass violence, genocides, and genocidal massacres have been and are going on. Information and analysis will be presented, and scholars who specialize in these areas will have an opportunity to exchange views and suggest ways, possibly, to ameliorate the situation. The fourth topic will address issues of international law, especially, but not exclusively, in relation to the political, economic, and other interests of great and small powers that may be involved in causing or preventing mass violence of the kind we are discussing here. In our final open session, we would like a panel of the chairpersons of the 4 discussion sessions to address the main issues, controversies, and possibly agreements that will have emerged during the symposium. This will be followed by a discussion on comparative genocide. The panel will be chaired by Professor Omer Bartov, who will ask the relevant questions. Let me now turn to the first entitled topic of this symposium, which we defined as a question whether and in what sense the Holocaust, the Shoah, can serve as a paradigm for dealing with other genocides or events that are close to being genocides. I would like to emphasize at the outset that what I'm presenting here are the analyses of just one of the participants, namely myself. And I certainly don't wish to foreclose the arguments and discussions that already took place and those that I hope will follow, especially including those by colleagues who I know disagree with me. It has become, I think, common wisdom to leave disputes over definitions of genocide behind us. There is, of course, the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, formally adhered to by most countries in the world with its definitions. Most academics dealing with the subject view the convention as a faulty instrument, which is only natural because it was the result, as the travaux préparatoires that preceded it show, the result of political horse trading between the West, the Soviet bloc, and a group of mainly Latin American states. There's therefore an obvious disconnect between the fact that the convention is international law and therefore should serve, ideally, as an instrument in the prevention and punishment of these crimes, and the other fact, namely that the convention did not and does not help in achieving its aim. Most of us think, I believe, in terms approximating those offered in 1990 by Professor Frank Chalk, who is also here with us, and his late colleague Kurt Jonathan. I quote, "Genocide is a form of one-sided mass killing in which a state or other authority intends to destroy a group as that group and membership in it are defined by the perpetrator." I would view it as less of a definition and more of a description of the kind of human action we are trying to prevent. The basic problem with these concepts is that they are abstractions from reality. And reality is always much more complicated than our definitions can be. They are crutches that may help us walk, and at best, they are approximations to what they purport to define. Hence the futility of arguments about the definitions of 1948. However, I don't think that anyone here proposes to amend or change the convention. It is international law, and we should keep it that way and try to use it if we can, despite its shortcomings. My bias as an historian is that I have to ask whether genocides or events that approximate genocides are a matter of the last couple of 100 years. The answer is very clear. Genocidal events have been part of human history ever since Homo sapiens emerged out of previous forms of animal life about 150 to 200,000 years ago in East Africa. Quite recently, in 2010, archaeologists found graves of groups of humans in Neolithic sites in Thalheim in Germany and Schelz in Austria. They were killed by other humans, as the stone weapons showed that were found next to the skeletons of men, women, and children, including babies. Genocidal massacres have been with us for ages. Ancient texts are full of stories about mass murder and annihilation of groups. That includes the Bible. For instance, chapter 31 in the 4th book of Moses, where God causes the mass murder by the Israelites of all the Midianites except for the virgins. It does not matter whether this actually happened or not, but the story clearly reflects consensual ways of behavior. Why should that be so? I cannot prove it, but I strongly believe that humans, not much different from our chimpanzee cousins, defend their real or virtual territory against what they perceive as invasion by other groups. We are territorial predatory mammals, and we live by eating meat and fish, as well as by collecting fruit of the earth and of trees and bushes. We are still hunter-gatherers, And though we don't go out in the streets of Jerusalem to hunt antelopes, there aren't that many antelopes in Jerusalem anyway, we, except for some vegetarians among us, go into supermarkets and pick the meat, the fish, and the fruit off the shelves. We eat grass because there are certain types of grass that we call grains, out of which we prepare bread or corn or cakes and eat them. However, we are very weak predators and cannot hunt and collect as individuals. We are therefore herd animals, and it is crucial for us to defend our herd's territory, real or virtual. When another group comes into our space, whether that space is again real or virtual, we have basically 4 options of response. 1, to accept and absorb the other group because it may strengthen us. 2, enslave them or use them to do work that we don't want to do. 3, try and expel them. 4, kill them. As far as I can tell, these 4 options, separately or in different combinations, were followed in all cases I am aware of. That means that we have the killing instinct in us. After all, we are predators. If you look at the biblical commandments, the relevant one for this discussion says, "Thou shalt not murder." It does not say, "Thou shalt not kill," because killing is not only permitted, but if you do it in an organized way and kill members of another group, you get medals for it. Inside a society, however, permission to murder destroys the very fabric of acceptable existence. Therefore, murder is forbidden killing. Killing is permitted murder. The wrong conclusion from this would be that as humans are programmed, in certain circumstances, to kill, it is useless to try and control group killing. Wrong, because as members of herds, we have developed the opposite tendencies as well. And without these, the herd cannot survive. Sympathy, love, willingness to cooperate, to compromise, to behave socially so that families, clans, and ultimately tribes, ethnicities, or nations can assure their children a chance of living out their lives in relative peace. It can even lead to sacrifice one's well-being and even one's life in order to rescue another person, even from another human herd. The mostly unconscious assumption behind it is that if the situation should change, the rescuers will be supported by the rescued. This has proven to be true in the very many cases of Jewish Shoah survivors who have supported their needy rescuers even unto the 2nd and 3rd generations. The conflicting attitudes we identify as good and evil can be found in most, if not all, classical texts. Doing good is the life-affirming, society-building moral behavior, and doing evil is the opposite. Good translates into, or maybe stems from, individual behavior, because we cannot exist without supporting and being supported by our family, clan, neighborhood, community, tribe, ethnicity, nation, and state. The basis for that lies in the very fact of our being herd animals, and it creates a countervailing force to our inclination to kill. It explains why fighting group killings, while extremely difficult, has a chance. Is then morality a purely functional relative value? I don't think so. It is certainly primarily functional, but it becomes an autonomous, highly consensual value in itself. And anyone who detects in this attempt of analysis a Marxist influence on the one hand and a Kantian one on the other hand will be right. Morality in the sense of seeking the so-called good is absolute, because without it no society can exist, and most individuals in any given society will accept its consensual expressions willingly or unwillingly. Specific moral concepts change within and between societies, but seeking to abide by concepts consensually defined as moral is a general characteristic of human groups. But morality is also relative, because it depends on the existence of human society. Human society developed from earlier forms of life, and like anything else in our universe, it will die and disappear, together with its gods, its moral teachings, its achievements, its hopes and its failures, its cultures and its genocides, and share the fate of dinosaurs, saber tigers, and dead stars. This is as certain as our individual deaths are, but we do not know what will cause the collective demise of Homo sapiens. Our endeavor here at this symposium is, in the end, an attempt to contribute to the hope of postponing that moment for as long as we possibly can. But when that moment does come, as it inevitably will, morality will disappear together with the human race that created it. When we deal with mass violence, and specifically with the intent and action to annihilate human groups as such, in whole or in part, we are addressing a common human trait. The slogan, man's inhumanity to man, is a falsehood. Our problem is not that mass killings, including those of children and defenseless adults, are inhuman. Our problem is that these acts, including sadism, torture, and the like, are very human indeed. In this continuum of acts of mass violence, triggered by economic, social, political, military, ideological, or religious factors, which stretches from the beginnings of the human race and before that, till today, where does the genocide of the Jews in World War II, inaccurately known as the Holocaust, or the Shoah, come in? There are central elements that are common to all genocides, including the Holocaust. First of all, the very intent to annihilate a group as such, in whole or in part. Second, the suffering of the victims. There is no difference in the suffering of Tutsi, Fur, Oglala Sioux, Chinese peasants, kulaks, Jews, Khmer, Poles, or anyone else caught up in these horrors. There is no better genocide than another, no better killing of children than another killing of children. One cannot measure suffering. The supposed competition of victimhood is a politically motivated invention. It is, of course, natural for members of communities who were targeted for mass murder to emphasize the suffering of their groups. But again, there's no difference in this between Poles, Russians, Armenian, Jews, Tutsi, or anyone else. We can therefore safely leave this contrived argumentation behind us and say that there is no difference in victimhood. There are certainly more parallels between genocides, including the Holocaust, and it is our task as researchers to identify them. This can only be done by comparing genocides with each other and with other forms of mass violence. Comparison, which is the methodology employed for clarifying such issues, will obviously bring up both parallels and equally important differences. Those Jews and non-Jews who argue against such comparisons will say that the Holocaust was unique. A. Royd Eckhart, a Protestant minister and a pioneer in Christian Jewish studies, said that the Holocaust was uniquely unique. But the argument for uniqueness makes little sense. If I said that the Holocaust was unique, never mind uniquely unique, that would mean that it can never happen again because it was a one-time occurrence. and therefore it cannot be even compared with anything. In that case, we might just as well forget about it, because it would have no meaning for the generations after it, except as something to be remembered in whatever liturgy one would invent for it. There would be no real reason to study it. It would also mean that it took place outside of history, caused by God or by Satan uniquely. But the fact is that it was caused by humans, for human reasons, and with human backgrounds, that one can investigate with the same kind of intellectual tools we use to interpret and explain any other event in human history. Admittedly, events such as the Holocaust are much more difficult to explain than, let us say, British imperial policies in India. But in principle, as well as in actual practice, the Holocaust is no less explicable, and we have come by now a long way towards reasonable proposals for explanations. Therefore, I would submit that the Holocaust was not unique. What was it then? If one compares genocides and events that approximate genocides, one finds that the reasons why these things occur repeat themselves, though they will never be exactly parallel. I have yet to find a genocidal event except for the Holocaust, whose elements are not repeated in other genocides. One may take the Rwandan and Darfurian genocides as examples, and I'm choosing them also because there are marked differences between them. In the case of Rwanda, and I'm cutting this very short, very brief, a Hutu power dictatorship developed based on very real social differences between the Hutu and the minority Tutsi, who had formed the ruling classes in pre-colonial Rwandan monarchy and had oppressed the Hutu peasant majority. Hutu and Tutsi are not separate ethnicities because they speak the same language, go to the same churches, and follow similar traditions. The German and mainly the Belgian colonialists utilized the social differences and helped in solidifying them into virtual ethnicities and supported first the Tutsi and later the Hutu. The Tutsi owned much of the land and the cattle and were prominent in the developing trading and intellectual elite. Rwanda became formally independent in 1962. The new republic was headed by Hutu politicians and adopted a previously developed ideology that declared that the Tutsi were descendants of foreign invaders and not real Rwandans, something that recent DNA probes have shown to be entirely contrived. The ideology was a cover for a desire, nurtured especially by a new elite of Hutu, who originated in northwestern Rwanda, which had never been under Tutsi domination, to achieve total control, also against Hutu democratic and social democratic groups and parties that opposed the developing Hutu power dictatorship under Juvenal Habyarimana. Dissatisfaction with the economic and social situation was afterwards diverted to attack the Tutsi minority, and a series of massacres, starting as early as 1959, led to a flight of Tutsi and opposition Hutu, mainly to Uganda. In 1990, a predominantly Tutsi army, the RPF, invaded Rwanda from the north and slowly managed to advance southward. The predominance of radical Hutu was threatened by an international effort to achieve a democratic reconstruction of the country. This and other factors led to a coup which was prepared by a radical Hutu power group on April 6, 1994, and that was directed actually first against the Hutu democratic opposition. It then turned into a genocidal attack at the Tutsi, against the Tutsi and against Hutu oppositionists. The elements one can discern here are a struggle for the maintenance of power by Hutu extremists, a desire to acquire the land, cattle, and central positions in the economy and the intellectual elite held by the Tutsi minority, and a real fear of the RPF army, which threatened the Hutu dictatorship. The reasons for the outbreak of the genocide are therefore pragmatic: a power struggle, economic interests, and a military threat. All this being justified by an invented racist ideology. In the case of Darfur, basic ecologic factors were the slow extension of the Sahara Desert and the increasing difficulty of maintaining herds of cattle, sheep, goats, camels, and horses, from which the Bedouin tribes surrounding the Darfurian heartland made a living, and the resulting increase in tensions between these herders and the black farming ethnicities that had been in control of the area for hundreds of years, if not more. On top of that came a power struggle over the distribution of wealth, especially after the discovery of oil in South Sudan, which the black Darfurian farmers, enraged by the neglect of their interests, demanded from the central government in Khartoum. This was exacerbated by the use of Darfurian black ethnicities in internal power struggles in Khartoum, especially between a faction led by the ideologist Hassan Tourabi and the emerging military dictatorship under Omar Hassan al-Bashir. Contrary to Rwanda, the genocide in Darfur was almost accidental, but was the result of the brutal governmental reaction to the rebellion by the black ethnicities who demanded economic and political autonomy and a redistribution of wealth. In both Rwanda and Darfur, militias did most of the killing. In Rwanda, mainly one of them, the Interahamwe, organized by the Hutu power group, and in Darfur, the Janjaweed, organized by the main Bedouin tribes in alliance with Khartoum. The ideology used to cover the Darfurian genocide was the creation of one man, Ahmed Assil Akbash, who declared that the Darfur Bedouins were the descendants of the tribe of the Prophet and were therefore entitled to get rid of the black tribes and inherit the land between the Nile and Lake Chad. With all these differences, both genocides were, or are, clearly motivated by pragmatic interests, whether based on power struggles or economic, social, political, or military interests. Ideology serves as justification for pragmatics. I would argue that similar patterns exist in all genocides or similar events throughout history. In some cases, there is no need for an ideology, and the mass murder is carried out openly in order to ensure expansion or economic and other interests. Blatant examples are the conquest of Carthage in 146 BC, or the conquest by the Mongols of Iran, Russia, and other countries in the 13th century. Apart from the approval by the relevant gods, no ideological explanation was needed. Genocides and similar events are caused by real or imagined pragmatic needs, with ideological justifications in a part of the cases. The Holocaust is an exception. Jews in Europe generally, and in Germany, Austria specifically, had no territory, did not control any economy, had no government, political power, or even a united representation, and of course, no army to protect themselves. The Nazis and their supporters did not kill the Jews because they wanted their property. They took their property because they wanted to first drive them out and later to kill them. The Roma were in a similar situation. But the Roma were perceived by the Germans generally, and the Nazis in particular, as a nuisance, not as an existential threat, as the Jews were viewed. And of course, there was never a Nazi intent to kill all the Roma. In fact, there was an explicit decision not to do so, and to kill some, not all. The accusations against the Jews, or what we call Nazi anti-Semitism, were purely ideological, with no pragmatic elements in them. The central accusation was that of a supposed Jewish conspiracy to rule the world, an accusation which, of course, was not invented by National Socialism. The Nazi approach can easily be distilled from a mountain of documentation. a combination of Jewish financiers in the West and Jewish Bolsheviks in the East, was threatening to replace the existing strata of world and government leaders by international Jewry in order together to install Bolshevik rule in the world. This is almost an exact quote. It can be shown that this was not just propaganda, but a real belief and a basic motivation to unleash a war that would prevent that apocalyptic danger. As my colleagues here know, many historians argue that it was the structure of German society that led to impasses whose solutions were found in the murder of the Jews, with anti-Semitic ideology only in the background. There can be no doubt that structural, economic, and social problems, as well as political and military exigencies, significantly contributed to the development of the genocide of the Jews. But structures don't kill. People kill, and they have to be motivated to do so. It is very clear to me that as there was no economic and political motivation that can explain the murder, and as what the Nazis said, they acted out. It was the anti-Semitic ideology that was the main factor explaining the Holocaust, the genocide. In fact, structural and mainly economic rational reasons should have prevented it. Indeed, wherever economic interests did not clash with ideological postulates, economic, rational reasoning won out. But I have yet to see an instance during the Holocaust in which, where such a clash occurred, rationality won. They killed the people who were working for them, while they were working for them. They murdered even the specialists whom they had kept alive for a while out of rational considerations. And they decided, not right at the beginning, but in stages, to kill every person with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents, and to do so everywhere in the world, if they could. There is no historical precedent for such a policy, decided upon by a political apparatus directed towards the extermination of every single individual of the targeted group as defined by the perpetrator, and such an individual that the state bureaucracy could find. Total annihilation has occurred in the past, as for instance in the case of the Caribbean Indians, but that was not the intended outcome of Spanish colonialist policies. Another approach to explain genocide generally, and the genocide of the Jews in particular, argues that it is largely colonialism or imperialism that is the main cause. This, to be sure, is a serious argument, and this is certainly true in quite a number of cases. The obvious one being the genocide of the Herero and the Nama by Imperial Germany's army in what today is Namibia in 1904-05. However, this line of thinking seems to me to ignore the fact that genocide has been with us since time immemorial and before that. And mass murder in Neolithic times, or the purported murder of the Midianites, for instance, quoted above, or the mass murder of the kulaks under Stalin, cannot be explained by economic and political structures that emerged from Europe and America in the last 5 centuries. Nor can the Gukurahundi, the mass murder of the Ndebele by the Mugabe regime in Zimbabwe in 1982, be explained by any long-term influence of British colonialism there. Nor can the present-day genocide in Darfur. The intention of the Nazis to settle Ukraine and the Crimea with German peasants was influenced by German pre-1914 imperialist traditions. And the German behavior towards the local populations in the East generally certainly had much to do with colonialist and racist attitudes imbibed from German imperialism. But the murder of the Jews was not at all a necessary consequence of such policies. Quite the contrary. It seems to me that without a murderous anti-Semitic policy, patriotic German Jews would have willingly participated in such imperialist ventures. Nor is the racist, anti-black policy of German imperialism comparable or even similar to the existential animosity and fear of the Jews by National Socialism. The Holocaust was thus not a result of imperialism, but colonialism and imperialism are factors that have to be taken into account. They are not the main ones, and most certainly not the only ones. Nazi racism is another element we have to consider when discussing the genocide of the Jews. Racism, that is separation of human groups by the criteria of quote-unquote blood and skin color, is the product mainly of the Spanish Reconquista of the 15th century. Before that, there was no discrimination in Europe on the basis of color, as anyone who has seen the many statues in Gothic churches of Saint Mauritius, the African saint, knows. The first law of limpieza de sangre, purity of blood, was issued in Toledo in 1449 and was directed against conversos, Arabs and Jews. From the 16th century on, slave traders on the West African coast, overwhelmingly white, with a sprinkling of blacks, Arabs, and Jews, justified their shipping of black slaves to the Americas by the black color of their victims' skin. Modern racism is usually associated with Arthur de Gobineau in the mid-19th century, and racism became a widely accepted explanation of the differences between human groups. It was adopted largely by a secularized, anti-Christian, nationalist right wing in Western societies, and it had later developed into the National Socialist variant. The question is whether Nazi anti-Semitism was a derivative of racism or whether Nazi racism was mainly the outcome of anti-Semitism. This, of course, is a matter of intense contention. My own reading of Nazi texts on racism leads me to a very clear conclusion. They had to anchor their radical anti-Semitism in an all-inclusive worldview. Not just their ideological musings, but their very real policies were directed at their very center against what they perceived as the global threat of the Jewish conspiracy. And their racist dreams led them to seek a new world order in which the Nordic peoples of the Aryan race would rule the world, with all the others in a kind of hierarchy underneath them. Their anti-Christianity was, of course, based on Christian traditions, and the godly people were the Nordic ones, where Satan was identical with a Jew. The great global struggle was between the Nazi good, the Germanic peoples and their leader on the one hand, and the satanic powers led by the Jews on the other hand. Enemies of the Nazi Reich were always led by collaborators and slaves of the Jews. Racism in the Nazi version was a necessary accompaniment of their dichotomous Manichaeic world with the Jews as the ultimate enemy. I suggest that anti-Semitism was the fons and origo of Nazi racism, which in its turn was a completely new type of apocalyptic ideology. While history is full of attempts, successful or otherwise, to replace one religion by another, one ethnicity or nationality by another, one empire by another, or one social class by another, with the Nazis we had the intent by important segments within a major power to institute a new world order based on race. But there are no races. We all descend from early humans in East Africa, and the differences of skin color, shape and size of bodies, and so on, are secondary and tertiary mutations. Differences between different types of dogs are greater than between different types of humans. An Australian Aborigine marrying a Harvard graduate will produce healthy children. Nazism was based on what my history teacher would call false historical consciousness. And that was based on a worldview that saw the struggle against the Jews as the center of its policies. There are no precedents for this type of genocide, which is why I've called the Holocaust not unique, but unprecedented. But that means that the Holocaust is a precedent, one that not only can, but actually is being followed, not in the same extreme way, but in similar ways. It is therefore a very useful starting point for dealing with genocide generally. Is the Holocaust paradigmatic? I hope not. It is, I believe, the most extreme form of genocide so far, not because of the suffering of the victims, and not because of the number involved, or because of the sadism and brutality that it involved, but because of the structural elements that I tried to present here. Can genocide and mass murder be prevented? With tremendous difficulty, they hopefully can at least be reduced. Is international law an important tool in this? Of course it is. But we have to deal with realities. And the reality is that when international law contradicts the interests of major powers, and sometimes even of very minor ones, it is ignored. Did it nevertheless play a role in the fact, as some of our colleagues here have established, that the incidence of mass violence and genocidal massacres has actually decreased over the past 2 decades? And it has. Or is this decrease due to other factors, or perhaps even to a temporary decline only? International law may possibly have become more effective, and may possibly do so in the future. And the fact that all powers pay lip service to it, without meaning it really, shows its potential importance. Making it more and more consensual is one positive way of going about it. But that can only be done by diplomacy. The use of military force is in most, though not in all cases, a double-edged sword. And the recent American debacles in Iraq and Afghanistan prove that ideological enemies can only rarely be conquered by force. I hope we can discuss this in some detail in this symposium. The Holocaust was, in Dandina's formulation, a civilizational break, a Zivilisationsbruch. Its universal implications should lead us to deepen our understanding of genocide generally. Never again is an empty, hollow, lying slogan. Rather, let us go and learn, as the Jewish sage Hillel the Ode said in about 200 BC, and draw practical political conclusions from them. So let us go and learn. Dixi et salvavi animam meam. Thank you.
This was a kind of profound lecture which we have come to expect of you. We have now 2 respondents, and I would like to call on Professor מכמן of Bar-Ilan University and Yad Vashem.
Okay. Good evening, dear colleagues and friends. It's always a challenge to speak after, and even more so as a respondent to Yehuda Bauer. His in-depth view and his energetic presentation are inspiring and thought-provoking. As the time allotted to my response, and that is Raz Segal is responsible for that, is very limited, I would like to summarize my understanding as a Holocaust historian of the questions he posed and the points he made, although not in the order in which he presented them. It should be said that we already dealt with several of these aspects extensively today in the session preceding this one. So one topic raised by Professor Bauer was the comprehension of the Holocaust. That is, what exactly we should have in mind when we use this term for a certain historical event. The second topic was to what extent the Holocaust can be used as a paradigm for the study of the past and the prevention of future genocides, an issue which evokes the question of uniqueness, unprecedentedness, and/or exceptionality. And the third was if genocide can be prevented at all in the light of human nature. And Bauer's forecast, in fact, is very pessimistic, I would say, though he believes that in the name of humanism we have to do it and to try. So first to the first question, what exactly was the Holocaust? It was interesting that we heard from Ambassador Arad an entirely wrong definition. No Holocaust historian would subscribe to that definition which you read to us. But it is a very complicated issue, and it has been approached by many historians, philosophers, theologians, and others since World War II. However, many scholars, and even more so lay people, tend to use the term or terms. It's not only Holocaust and Shoah, but there were other terms, Churban, cataclysm, and more, nonchalantly, as if its meaning is clear and undisputed. The terms used in order to conceptualize the atrocities aimed at the Jews by the Nazis and their consorts, and to differentiate between them and other Nazi mass killings and atrocities on the one hand, and persecutions of Jews in past times on the other hand, emerged gradually and through different paths among non-Jews and Jews in the 1940s and the 1950s. The very use of a specific name or some equivalent, which defines and demarcates a cluster of activities as a singular event, meant that the observers and scholars who took up the term or terms thought of this episode as having been different at its core. But what was the core? On this issue, opinions differ greatly. In the discourse stemming from or influenced by the field of genocide studies, one can increasingly find a narrowing of the meaning of the event, equating the Holocaust with the actual murder of close to 6 million Jews. In Holocaust studies, carried out separately or more independently, it is not under the constraint of the genocide perspective. The periodization of the Holocaust is always much broader, starting the event at least in September 1939 and usually much earlier with the Nazi rise to power, which means that the Holocaust includes many more elements than just the physical murder. Thus, the comprehension of the very nature of the event and consequently of its origins are viewed in different ways, which is essential for the question of the Holocaust serving as a paradigm or model for genocide research. Baauer, in a way, and here is indicative for a whole series of scholars, tried to keep both interpretations through the idea of once it was the unique, now it's the unique and the universal, now unprecedented and the universal. The special feature of the Holocaust, among other genocides, is to be found, according to this approach, in its main historical cause, the Nazi ideology, which was grounded in non- or even counter-pragmatic anti-Semitism, which had its own history, infused with a racism focused on blood and fear for a supposed Jewish conspiracy to rule the world, a mixture which served as the motivation to unleash a war that would prevent that apocalyptic danger. That's a quotation from, and you heard it before. My comprehension is close to it, and yet different, because of some important aspects. I cannot elaborate on this here at length, but I firmly believe, as a conclusion of my research on a variety of issues regarding the Holocaust, that the definition of Nazi anti-Semitic policies as an ideology, even as being the core of the racist Nazi ideology, does not suffice. An ideology is a set of ideas that constitute one's goals, expectations, and actions, as one definition has it. An ideology is a comprehensive vision, a way of looking at things, a system of abstract thought applied to public matters. It is therefore very much in the realm of logical thinking, even if it is a perverse logic. But we have to look for the mental dimension in order to grasp the driving force which mobilized and could evoke the enormous dedication of so many Germans and non-Germans throughout Europe who were not Nazis to the project of prosecuting the Jews. How do we explain the energy invested in it by so many actors? The creativity used in order to find modes to implement an ideology which was vague and whose ultimate leader, Adolf Hitler, had no clear idea regarding how to do it. The determination to go on, even vis-à-vis setbacks and looming defeat and disaster. Ideology as such, as the explanatory cause, is not sufficient in my opinion. It is important to emphasize that, different from other cases of genocide I know of, in the Holocaust it was not only one state and its regime that turned against a people or a group. The intriguing point is that so many people from all over Europe turned against the Jews, and all the more so in a historical situation in which the Jews were not a nation, a people, or even a class according to the common understanding of these categories in Europe at the time. Indeed, it was one of the core activists of the persecution and murder project, SS-man Dieter Wislicennik, one of Adolf Eichmann's aides, who explains in the most revealing, unasked for, post-war written testimony in 1946, that in Nazism's view, and I quote, "The world is directed by forces of good and evil. According to this view, the principle of evil was embodied in the Jews. This world of images is totally incomprehensible in logical or rational terms, because it is a form of religiosity that leads to sectarianism. Millions of people believe these things. Something, and listen well, that can be compared only, that's his words, to similar phenomena from the Middle Ages, such as the mania of witches, Hexenwahn." In this symposium, we are talking about possible comparisons. Wislicennik claimed, as a person who was involved, that is, from a viewpoint within the core of executors, that what we call the Holocaust can be compared only with the witch hunts of the Middle Ages. That is, the evil spirit of what they perceived as Jewish ideas had to be exorcised through the annihilation of its carriers, the physical Jews. World Jewry and its spirit were perceived by the Nazis and many throughout Europe as conspirational, powerful, and cohesive forces that had to be erased from the earth for the sake of human survival. That dimension, in my eyes, was new, definitely, when it became the creed of a well-organized and powerful state. Though Jews were not the only group persecuted by Nazi Germany, they were the victims perceived as most threatening. Hostility to Jews and Jewry was transformed into an apocalyptic, redemptive life or death battle against an allegedly parasitic, contaminating, and corrupting enemy. And we have to think also about the burning of books in this context. Above all, the Jews stood for the unnatural and corrosive principle of human equality, which underlay the pernicious beliefs of Christianity, liberalism, democracy, internationalism, capitalism, and communism, and undermined the hierarchical principle of nature. Therefore, in the end, the battle against Jews and Jewry was apocalyptic and had a redemptive goal, not just for Germany, but for the world. And apocalyptic thinking is theological, not ideological. It started in the very beginning of the Third Reich in 1933 with the trial and error quest for the way to implement it. It culminated in the physical murder, but the will was there from the beginning. This weird conglomeration of beliefs turned into such a destructive force because the historical moment was one of an enormous worldwide crisis, of an extreme destabilization of the existing structures. The fear was so all-embracing and mounted so high that masses and intellectuals flocked to the project to exorcise that evil force which they came to believe to be behind it all, which, on the basis of a long-standing European Christian tradition, was the Jew, represented in the real world by those who carried Jewish blood and their human beliefs. The Holocaust thus goes much beyond and actually contrary to the Jonathan definition of genocide, in my eyes, that was quoted before. Which leads us to the second question. Can or should the Holocaust be used as a paradigm for the study of past and the prevention of future genocides? In a way, this question should be considered as passé, first of all, as the term genocide itself was coined by Lemkin vis-à-vis the event which we now call Holocaust, although relating also to a variety of other mass murders at that time and earlier. So there is a clear link between the two, and it can be used. Second, I think that the burgeoning field of genocide studies has grown to a large extent from Holocaust studies, using the Holocaust as a starting point, case of departure, and sometimes as a paradigm, but we have heard already in a former session that it can also be misused or misunderstood. But see, for instance, Helen Fine's 1978 sociological attempt to extract a certain model from the Holocaust in her study Accounting for Genocide. Nevertheless, I can observe two problems. The first is a disciplinary one. The historian's task and craft is to describe and analyze the past in all its complexities in order to understand the world that we are living in now. He therefore must apply a thick description, to use Clifford Geertz's expression, and listen to the subtlest shades and varieties. The social scientist's modus operandi is to extract from several past, apparently comparable, events a model which can provide tools for future action in similar emerging cases. He's therefore geared to both sifting the peculiarities of the different cases and suggesting generalizing theories. From this perspective, as a historian, and taking into account what I said before on the nature of the Holocaust, I must say that in my eyes, there are elements in the Holocaust which can be integrated in the study of genocide, but the Holocaust itself is a much broader event, and its core is different. The Holocaust is not simply Judeocide, a synonym for the genocide of the Jews. One can learn from it certain, even many aspects of human behavior, because it was carried out by human beings in a variety of situations. But I'm not sure at all that it is a proper paradigm or model for preventing less comprehensive cases of mass murder. If we take the Holocaust's exceptional aspects as a model, we will not be able to understand the variety of peculiarities of other situations and their exceptional features themselves, and perhaps even minimize the dangers in less acute situations. In a most illuminating talk that I had several months ago with Bishop John Ruchiyahana, chairman of the Rwandan National Unity and Reconciliation Commission, he pointed to the fact that at the time, the controversy in the world around the question of whether what was happening in Rwanda was already or not yet genocide, according to the existing definitions, prevented prompt international intervention. The second problem is political and has to do with competitions of victimhood, an issue which was mentioned already. In a recent article assessing the state of affairs in genocide studies, Australian genocide scholar Colin Tetz observed that, and I quote, "Foremost, there is the challenge for genocide scholars of finding a space for encompassing and embracing the Holocaust with some comfort. The Judeocide is an ally, not an enemy, and not on the margins." End of quote. Tetz discerns an enmity in the camp of genocide scholars, of course not by all, definitely not by those who are a part of our meeting here, but he found it in the camp of genocide scholars towards the field of Holocaust studies. One can find expressions of this attitude in a series of studies which reject not only the will to use the Holocaust as a starting point or a comparable case, but goes in the opposite direction, insisting on imposing on the historical analysis of the Holocaust a straitjacket of some universal model of genocide. Sometimes this is the result of the feeling that all genocide should be evaluated equally, which is perhaps right from a moral point of view, but not from a scholarly analytical one. And here I agree with what has been said this afternoon by Professor Deborah. In other cases, it is clearly and regrettably the result of some anti-Israel bias, as has been pointed out well by Professor Isel Charney today. In any case, for a Holocaust scholar, it is often amazing to see how in dealings with the Holocaust from a genocide perspective, the ghetto phenomenon is misrepresented, the Judenräte phenomenon is usually omitted, the economic persecution interpreted as a byproduct, while it was a comprehensive effort already preceding the physical murder. The overall German attitude towards the Jews depicted as one of disgust and denigration, while overlooking the element of some mysterious admiration towards the Jews, which existed at the same time and exacerbated the fear from them, and more. Moreover, Jewish history is often totally disregarded, in fact. The Holocaust is sometimes de-Judaized, and I can point, for instance, to something which Timothy Snyder recently wrote in response to several critiques of his book Bloodlands, and he talks about Jewish history, and when you read it, you can see that he doesn't understand what Jewish history is. This brings me to the last point, the possibility of preventing genocide. This is an aspect which is entirely outside my expertise and will be discussed in the forthcoming days. I even would like to use an expression which Ian Kershaw once told me regarding another issue. I'm profoundly ignorant about this. Yet, when looking on past cases of mass murder, I think that last-minute international intervention on the brink of mass murder, or when it has already started, is the most difficult one. This can definitely be learned from the Holocaust and more recent cases. Real prevention has to be done through Sisyphean educational, diplomatic, and NGO efforts long before control over conflict situations is lost. Scholars can have an important role in this process by providing analytical insights. Yet the scholarly process itself has to be monitored too and constantly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our second respondent is Professor Jurgen צימרר, Professor of African History of Hamburg University, whose research includes German colonialism and the relationship between colonialism and genocide. Please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to apologize for my shabby outfit, but my suitcase is still in Frankfurt and didn't arrive. And I didn't know what to do, but then I thought they hadn't invited me for my good looks anyway, so I could just come like that. And at least you're not distracted from my words.
I will give you an solution.
It means a great honor for me to serve as a respondent to Professor Bauer's keynote lecture, and I'm very grateful for this privilege. I was very excited about the prospect when I was approached. However, the more I thought about Professor Bauer's paper, which I had in advance, the more I realized how difficult a task that was. Because a paper as rich and as insightful as his, based on decades of experience, study, and reflection, cannot adequately be represented and commented in just 10 minutes. Furthermore, and that is even the bigger problem, I agree with most of what he said. How could it be otherwise, given his erudition and learning? However, how boring would that make the following 10 minutes for you if I were simply to summarize his words, confirming all his points and basically repeating his lecture? I guess that's not why I have been invited as a respondent either. Therefore, I will for the sake of the argument, not even attempt to do him justice, but rather concentrate on a few critical thoughts, mostly theoretical and methodological, pertaining to the central topic of this conference, namely the relationship between Holocaust and other forms of genocide or other instances of genocide, and its influence on the idea of prevention. I will do that from my own area of expertise and will therefore briefly identify my own background and my subject position so that you know where I'm coming from. I'm, has been said, a historian of Africa and a scholar of German colonialism by training, and started my journey into the field of genocide studies with my research into the German genocide of the Herero and Nama people between 1904 and 1908 in what is now known as Namibia, which Professor Bauer referred to in passing. You may not know, but the evidence provided by historians convinced the German government in 2004 to publicly acknowledge the genocide and to issue an apology. During subsequent meetings between representatives of the Herero people and representatives of the German government and German civil society, of which I had the honor to be part of, to discuss ways for reconciliation and reparations, the Holocaust was repeatedly referred to by Herero leaders as paradigmatic. And here not only the crime, but also the way Germany dealt with the Holocaust. Tempting as it is, I will refrain here from commenting on the latter, the German way of Vergangenheitsbewältigung, because my take on it is rather more critical than that of the Herero leaders at the time. However, convinced that it cannot be accidental that twice within 40 years Germans attempted to create a racial state, that twice they intended to order society on the basis of perceived racial categories, but not persuaded by the simplistic slogan that what happened to the Herero was the same or equal to the Holocaust, I intensified my research on the relationship between colonialism and the Holocaust. I won't go into details here about my findings. Only this, I think German history shows that there is a deeper relationship between the idea of race and the concept of space in German history and beyond. It should be apparent by now that here I slightly disagree with Professor Bauer's take on the colonial dimension of Nazi violence. I think it's rather central. Perhaps this difference has to do with our understanding of colonialism, Professor Bauer's or mine. Colonialism, in this context, in my opinion, doesn't mean formal colonial rule, but more a general relationship of power, a mental framework that capitalizes on the construction of social groups, for example, colonizer and colonized, as binary opposites. These opposites are enshrined in a process of othering which attributes certain characteristics to both collectives and emphasizes difference. However, not only are both groups constructed as different, but one is also marked as inferior. In this process of inferiorization, the hegemonic speaker also affirms his own identity as the opposite of the inferior and thereby superior. I think that is a key process. Constructing somebody inferior is at the same time constructing yourself as superior, thereby legitimizing their own superior power position. This epistemological operation not only accompany the process of colonial subjugation, but they enable them in the first place. That's absolutely key. I think that post-colonial perspective allows for a much needed archaeological, in a Foucauldian sense, approach. And it also allows to integrate the Holocaust in the history of genocide without neglecting the unique elements of the Holocaust. As such, it should be tremendously useful for our task here at the workshop. The main difference in approach between Holocaust studies and genocide studies seems to me that the former concentrates on one historical event, however complex it is, whereas the latter tries, by definition, to compare and to identify commonalities. The whole field of genocide studies makes only sense if one accepts the existence of a multitude of distinct historical events which share enough commonalities to be sensibly grouped together under the heading of genocide. Professor Bauer has done so in an exemplary fashion in his paper For All Genocides but the Holocaust. For me, that raises the methodological problem, because what is a field worth in which the best known, for some even the paradigmatic or archetypal genocide or case, is singled out and quarantined? The goal should rather be to develop a concept for the understanding and the integration of such diverse historical events as the murder of the European Jewry in the concentration camps of Eastern Europe and the murder of the Herero in the African desert, to name just two examples from German history. And we could do it for the Tutsi, we could do it for Darfur, etc. I've already said that this does not mean to equate any two genocides, as of course historical events are never identical. Professor Baauer made the point that the Holocaust might not be unique, but because it could in theory be repeated, and therefore we have an obligation to learn from the past and to try to prevent its occurrence. Of course, one can only agree with that. However, we have been witness or are witness to several instances of genocide in our lifetime, or in my lifetime. Rwanda being the most prominent example. Other cases one could consider would be Darfur, or Bosnia, Armenia, or the already mentioned case of the Herero Nama. If the Holocaust was unprecedented and so far unrepeated, and that is how I understood your paper, what sense does it then make to treat the Holocaust as genocide at all, even as paradigmatic? How could the one mass destruction, which Professor Bowers identifies as special and fundamentally different, serve as a yardstick for a group of crimes against humanity to which it does not belong, because it is the exceptional case? This does not mean, obviously, that I disagree completely with Professor Baauer in his analysis. To the contrary, I think it is quite convincing what he says about anti-Semitism being different from other forms of racism. That's my result of my own research as well. Post-colonial theory has contributed to the understanding of the complex process of identity formation and the reciprocal relationship between the construction of the other and the self. By applying post-colonial insights to German anti-Semitism, and I'm limiting myself now to the German case, one can better understand the attractiveness of anti-Semitism for anti-Semites, in my opinion. By portraying Jews as immoral, Germans became trustworthy, became virtuous. By describing them as ruthless, Germans became trustworthy and honest. The image of the egoistic and individualistic Jew stabilized German self-perception of being loyal, at least to their folkish community. In a process of othering, similar to the processes identified by post-colonial theory as a key epistemological operation typical of colonial societies, anti-Semites established and constructed an idealized German self by constructing the Jewish other. For anti-Semites, Jews turned into an absolute other, which made German and Jewish existence appear incompatible. The belief in the danger of Jewish strength and cunning, which the stereotypes entail, has no equivalent in colonial or anti-Slavic racism. At least I don't know of any other case, and I think Professor מכמן had at the end referred to something similar. I mean, there is an admiration. The anti-Semites deeply, in a way, are frightened, but also admiring the Jew. That's why the Jew in the anti-Semite's perspective is perceived as being so dangerous. That's why it is a special sort of enemy. However, there are no equivalents to this in colonial or anti-Slavic racism. However, the simultaneity of the murder of the European Jewry and the war of annihilation against the Slavic people of the Soviet Union is too striking to be coincidental. A post-colonial approach offers one explanation by augmenting an essentialist interpretation of racism, one that looks solely on the nature of the victims of that racism, to a functionalist one. What function does this racism have in the society of the racist, of the perpetrator? I think if we take this seriously, that would allow us to take into account the singularity of the ideological hatred of anti-Semitism whilst allowing a comparison with other events. By separating the ideological mental framework from the causes of cross-rights violations, the economic and political crisis of Germany, for example, we would be able to integrate the Holocaust without denying the uniqueness of anti-Semitism. And that would enable genocide prevention to draw on the experience and the research of the Holocaust without leveling the historical or raising the historical specificity. Yeah, thank you. That's all I had to say for this. Thanks for your attention.
I think we can entertain a couple of questions, and then we will give the floor again to Professor Bauer. Please, can you identify yourself, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. My name is Frank Chalk. Professor Mishman referred in his presentation, as did Professor Bauer, to the definition that Kurt Johnson and I offered for a generic definition of genocide. And I'm very struck by Professor Mishman's statement that our definition of genocide does not cover what he understands to be the essence of the emphasis on demonic, satanic Judaism in leading to the Holocaust and during the Holocaust. Because we developed our definition, Professor Mishman, with the person who you did not mention, who has contributed, that's okay, who has contributed the most, I think, certainly in the early period, to our understanding of the role of ideology in anti-Semitic and other genocides. That's Norman Cohn in The Pursuit of the Millennium and other books, who sat with us for months as we developed this definition. So if our definition is not satisfactory, then Norman Cohn, as well as Kurt Johnson and I, missed the boat. And I'd just like you to explain why you think that our definition does not cover the case of satanic, demonic attribution to Judaism, of being in league with the devil, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Maybe I'm wrong, but the way I read it is, and the definition which you gave 22 years ago, I think, and it's also
1990s, so
yeah.
Exactly.
So and also in the way Professor Bauer presented it, we look at the persons as being the Jews as being the devil, the Satan. And I think, that it is not the physical Jews as such, and therefore not the group as such, but it is the spirit. It is spirit. Otherwise, I cannot explain the quest for burning the books and afterwards collecting libraries, and also the understanding that it's not just the Jews as a group, but the Jews are behind all these other ideologies that rule the world, right? So it is not that the definition is wrong. In my eyes, it is not sufficing. Therefore, I want, and I see another dimension, a mental, theological dimension, which is not enough represented in that one. That's my feeling. Maybe I'm wrong, but
That's okay.
Yeah.
The words in our definition, as defined by the cookie tree, specifically are there to cover this mythical, totally false perception of the reality and of the Jews who were murdered not really as Jews in the sense of Jewish history and Jewish tradition, but as part of the Nazi army, who was
We will.
The gentleman at the back, please. Can you identify yourself?
Some speakers here that the ideological component in the final solution is one of the characteristics that makes the Holocaust different than other genocides. That's what I understood. But I have a simple question to ask Professor Bauer and the experts here because I don't have an answer. And this is the following. Did the final solution include, in the eyes of the Nazis, include the extermination of all the Jews in the earth, including American Jews, British Jews, etc.? That is, if the idea was that in order to have a solution for what they call the Jewish problem, the only solution is to eliminate them, then by killing the European Jews, that would not have been enough, because a large part of the European people, of the Jewish people, were in other continents. Therefore, I am wavering between the two types of explanations. I had the impression that on the one hand, Professor Bauer was saying that groups of people, like the Germans, let's say, saw the Jews as a territorial problem. They were in their midst and they could do with them several things, including killing them. But they could have expulsated them, okay? So that's one way of thinking. The relativity of the final solution for European Jews. Another way to look at it is to say, no, the Holocaust was a completely different thing than a genocide, and it was a purely ideological, and therefore had to finish when the last Jew is killed.
You will respond at the end, all right? There is one more question. The last question, please. All right. Yes, so Professor Bauer will respond.
Very briefly. I don't actually much disagree with Dan מכמן. The idea of irrationality is something that is part and parcel, really, of the human experience. I mean, we live in a time of Idi Amin and Ruhollah Khomeini and various North Koreans and so on and so forth. So if you're looking always for rational approaches by dictators or potential perpetrators, you won't get very far. I think that irrationality is part of the human makeup, and we shouldn't be surprised at that. But it works into what I think I try to present. With the Jews, you see, the Jews were a symbol of the Satan, very largely. In Europe, I'm talking about Europe now, in the European Christian civilization. But to use something that my deceased colleague years ago, Uriel Tal, developed, there was a kind of what our philosophy teacher at Hebrew University, Nathan Rothenstreich, used to call hypostasis. In other words, the turning of interpretation so that the symbol becomes the content, and the content is the symbol. In other words, the Jews were considered to be a symbol of the satanic forces. The Nazis, they became the content of the symbol. In other words, they became the satanic forces. And I think that is, comes to another, there's another point there with what Dan Michman said. He differentiated between theological and ideological elements. I don't agree with that. Theology is ideology. And therefore, it's really conflated there. So, was the Nazi ideology theological? Yes, it was, because theology tries to explain everything in the world, a whole world picture. This is what they try to do. One underestimates their power of thinking. And if you look at the lectures and speeches and so on of Nazi professors at universities, they had quite a lot to say about these things. So this is one issue. I don't want to, we've been sitting here long enough, so I want to be very brief. Now, as far as Jürgen צימרר said, was concerned, you know, again, I agree that colonialism and imperialism has a place in the explanation of genocides generally, and on the margins, I would say, in the Holocaust as well. Because there is no monocausal explanation for anything. So when I say the main point is ideology, I'm here following what I normally don't, namely the Little Red Book by Mao Zedong. Because what he said was that there were any event is the result of an infinite number, a meeting of an infinite number of causal chains. And because they are infinite, you cannot ever know them, which destroys Marxist determinism once and for all, okay? And then he says, but what you can do, you can actually find out what the main causal chains are, and then possibly you may have some kind of reasonable interpretation. What he doesn't tell us is that he's actually quoting Karl Marx in the third volume of Das Kapital, which was published only once in Germany in 1923 in Leipzig, which was composed of what they found in Marx's drawers. And there he has, Marx himself has a total destruction of his own theory. Yeah? Determinism goes by the board. Historical materialism, dialectical materialism, nonsense, okay? But what I'm trying to say here is that you cannot really predict. There's no way of predicting because you can never know all the causes. Now, what he said was that the Nazis planned the annihilation of the Slavic peoples. No, that's absolutely wrong, I think. The Bulgarians, the Slovaks, the Croats were Slavic peoples. They never intended to annihilate all the Ukrainians, Belarusians, not even the Russians. In fact, in a statement by a Nazi ideologue by the name of Wetzel, in a memorandum he submitted to Himmler in 1942 or 43, I don't remember now, he said, we can't treat these people like we treat the Jews. In other words, there was no plan whatsoever. Just as there was no plan to annihilate all the Roma, there was no plan to annihilate the Slavic peoples. The only people who were supposed to be annihilated were the Jews. And there I come to the question of the gentleman over there. Yes, they intended, they developed an intention, I would say, because of the logic that you presented. There is a statement by Hitler in a meeting that he had with Haj Amin al-Husseini on the 28th of November 1941, where Mr. Hitler didn't know any Arabic and Mr. Husseini didn't know any German, so they had a translator stenographer. So we know what was said. And Hitler said at one point, in order to calm the worries of Mr. Husseini, that once we win the war, we'll turn to other countries in the world to treat the Jews the way we treat them here. It's not the only case, because already in something that every Holocaust scholar knows, you know, from year one in the first year BA, the famous document signed by Goering of 31st of July 1941, in which he says that there should be a proposal by Heydrich of a Gesamtlösung, an overall solution, where in all the areas that are within the economic sphere of Germany, which means, because they intended to include plenty of other places, practically everywhere in the world. There are other indications of this kind of thing, and I think it's perfectly clear. This was the only case I know in history of a universalist or universal kind of a global solution to a particular problem like that. Now, the more important and really serious issue is if I say that the Holocaust had elements that don't exist in other genocides, is it still a genocide? This was your question. And there is a disagreement between us, because yes, I think if you take a mountain range, and in the middle of that mountain range there is a mountain that's twice as high as all the other mountains around it, does it mean to say that that is not a part of the mountain range? I think it is. In other words, if there are elements in the Holocaust that didn't exist before, then it means, first of all, that that's not the last word, because this can be repeated, not in exactly the same way, to be sure, but in similar ways. So I don't think that that excludes the Holocaust from the definition of whatever it is of genocide altogether. On the contrary, I think that if you have an extreme case like that, which includes many elements of all the other genocides, there's no doubt about that, then there is a greater depth in your analysis of other genocides. Therefore, I think that and I've said this many times over, that the Holocaust evinces the two sides, the specificity and the universality, which are supportive of each other, which are really two sides of exactly the same coin. Colonialism is my last point. I think I agree with most of what you said. The point is that where exactly does colonialism, German colonialism, influence German policies towards the Jews? It's not just the issue of race, you know, we are superior and so on and so forth. It's not just that. It's a whole European great power system that developed over 500 years. And yes, that has an impact. But if I take the case of the Ukraine, and I try to do that, you know, in the Ukraine they tried to settle German settlers. Was that a case of applied colonialism? Certainly it was. Did they learn something from what happened in German Empire before World War I? They said so. They've exaggerated differences, but it certainly was influential. It had nothing to do with the Jews. The Jews were not eliminated because they wanted a colonial empire there. They wanted a colonial empire, to be sure. The Jews were eliminated because they were Jews. The Lebensraum theory, living space was based on the fact, and I can show that, we can argue about that afterwards in the symposium. There is a document of 22nd of August 1936, which all of us know, all researchers of the Holocaust know that, of a memorandum by Hitler to Goering. And in that, and it's perfectly clear there. And this was not propaganda. This was an internal document between two major Nazi leaders. It emerges perfectly clearly. Living space is in the Ukraine and the Northern Caucasus. That's where it lies. Who controls that? Bolshevik Jewry or Jewish Bolshevism, who are in alliance with the Western Jewish capitalists. So the living space, which they didn't need, we all know that. They didn't need it. It was not something objective. Was another formulation of an ideological primacy. Now one can go on and deal with this until the morning, but we have a very long day tomorrow. So thank you very much for your attention.
All right. There are, of course, many things to discuss, and Professor מכמן would like to respond. But it will become an unending exercise, and there are 2 more days, so I'm sure you will have an opportunity tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Thank you very much for sharing all this with us, and the symposium continues tomorrow and on Tuesday.